Hi, I'm Howard Drossin, and you're listening to the SEGA Lounge.
Welcome to the SEGA Lounge, a podcast dedicated to our love for all things SEGA, be it the games, the music, or the community. I'm KC. In each episode, I'll be talking to different guests and sharing their projects and their passion for SEGA. Hello and welcome to the SEGA Lounge, your weekly podcast dedicated to our favorite Big Blue company. A company that has celebrated earlier this week its 60th anniversary. I've been a SEGA fan for almost half of its existence, and I'm glad to be able to share my passion for the company through this podcast. Hopefully, we'll see more exciting games and projects coming from SEGA in the future. Go SEGA! Hashtag Go SEGA. Hashtag SEGA 60th. In related news, there is now a SEGA-themed UFO catcher game you can play on your smartphone's browser. Earth UFO Catcher invites SEGA fans from all over the world to take part in a planetary-scale crane game and find characters, logos, hardware, and more items related to the Big Blue. You can access it on your phone by going to ufo.sega.com. That's ufo.sega.com. If you can catch all items before the end of the event on June 9th, you can apply to receive a physical commemorative medal. And you can also share your collection on Twitter too. Have fun and be sure to tag @the SEGA Lounge if you get some cool items while playing. As we celebrate 60 years of SEGA, it's a real honor for me to talk about this week's guest and his role in creating music for amazing games back in the 90s. This week's guest is an American musician and composer who joined the SEGA Technical Institute in the 1990s and worked on games such as Sonic Spinball, Sonic & Knuckles, Comix Zone, and The Ooze during his tenure. He later wrote music for Die Hard Arcade and Dynamite Cop, Alien Front Online, and even Sonic and the Black Knight. He is now focused on writing music for films. This was one of the most interesting interviews I ever did on the show, and we spent so much time talking that I had to split the interview into two parts. It's my pleasure to open the doors of the lounge to the great Howard Drossin. Stay tuned for the first part of the interview as Howard talks about his beginnings as a musician, working at STI, and takes our Quick Shots challenge. Hello, Howard. Welcome to the SEGA Lounge. How are you doing these days? Has this affected your work significantly?
It has, because there were two things I was slated to work on. One of them was a live concert, and the other one was a TV show that was about to go into production. And both of them, for obvious reasons, have been shelved for a later date, which I have no idea when that's happening. The big plus, we're doing fine. My family's fine. I've got 3 kids and a lovely wife. And, we've spent a lot of time with our kids and trying to help them get through this and understand what's going on. So we're doing fine. I also spent a lot of my time doing, especially during this period right now, doing some volunteer work as well to help feed less fortunate people who are really struggling right now as a result of this.
Great.
And
yeah, awesome. But it's good that you're at least physically you're doing well, right? So no virus around the house.
Yes, no virus around the house, and we've been careful, and pretty much everybody around us, at least where I live, everybody's being responsible. Mm-hmm. But I have to say, as awful as this is, in so many ways, especially economically and human health wise, there are some bright spots that have come out of it. I think for the first time in my whole life here in Los Angeles, the air is pure and clear. I've never seen it quite like it is now, have the kind of quality. It's probably like it was, a century ago. And my wife and I have kind of gotten into more of an exercise routine, a daily exercise routine where we've started running again and doing a lot of things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And this, there are some bright spots in all of this.
Yeah, I agree. And it's interesting how the planet actually can clean itself if we don't interfere.
Yes, and I really wish that we could all learn from this, kind of look around and maybe, when we do reset or, whenever they say use the word reopen here in America, that we could, listen, if there was ever a time to transition as, away from fossil fuel, I can't think of a better time than now when everything is shut down. But I'm just not sure if the powers that be will let that happen.
Yeah, actually, from countries that are already reopening and going back to whatever normal is right now, the pollution levels is already going back to what they were before, and I think Chinese people are already struggling with that as well. So I'm not sure if we never learn. That's the problem.
Yeah, maybe we're just not ready for it. But I have used this time to, focus musically on maybe some making some new discoveries musically, improving my skills. I've started scoring a short film, a student film, through a mutual friend I met through my volunteer work that needed music for her film. And so I'm helping her out with that and just trying to stay busy. And I think that's important for everybody in the middle of this is to try and, be creative and continue to grow and learn.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. Try to take something positive out of all of this mess, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's very easy to focus on negative things because it's about all you see in the media. And, but in spite of that, we can all try and focus on positivity. Mm-hmm. And if everybody would do that, we can come out of this a little stronger.
Indeed. Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back a couple of years, right? So how did you get into composing music?
Yeah. That was just a few years ago.
Exactly.
Really, I started playing instruments as a young child, and I kind of bounced around with different instruments. I played the cello first, and then the piano. I'd never planned on being a composer. I was actually an artist when I was a little kid, so I used to draw pictures of everything. But I spent my time practicing my instruments because I wanted to make my teachers happy. And then in early teenagehood, I discovered that, piano and cello weren't really things that were going to get you close to the ladies. So I think a few friends of mine had a band going, and they would play at school parties and things like that. And I went to a few of these things, and I saw that, hey, there were women talking to them afterward, and I thought, well, I'll go that route, and I started playing the guitar. And once I started, I just didn't stop. And but still, I never had any aspirations to be a composer. I used to make up songs. And the first band I was in, no one really had any songs, so I started writing songs. And that's really where my writing started, was being in bands. And
out of necessity, almost. Someone had to do it.
Yeah, out of necessity. And also, I think that some other guys in the band contributed a few things. I just didn't really like it. And I was just kind of felt like, well, I'm going to jump on this songwriting train. And, who am I to criticize somebody else if I'm not writing something? So that's really where writing in earnest started for me, was being in bands. And my parents, they're composers and artists in my family. So I was lucky enough to have parents that supported, one of their children being creative and wanting to go this route professionally. Though I wanted to be a guitar player. So my parents, kind of in my mid-teens, were kind of planting the seed in my head that you really should get a proper education and not rely on making a living playing the guitar in a band. And that led me to study music at a private conservatory. I started while I was still in high school, actually. And they offered a degree system, much like universities do or other colleges. And I don't remember how. I really think it was the urging of my parents. Hey, listen, go get a degree in something here. This is a field you want to be involved with. And if things don't work out, you can always teach. So that's really how it started for me. And, I went ahead and got this degree all the while playing in bands. And when I was done, I realized that, there aren't orchestras out there waiting to play your music that you've written. So I didn't really, this is pre-internet, I didn't really know, how does one go about doing any of this? And I thought, well, there's writing music for films. So I thought, okay, that's what I want to do. So I started writing music just on my own, that writing film cues, imagining scenes and just writing pieces of music. And this was around the time when MIDI instruments were really starting to become a widespread thing in the early 90s. And I managed to get a loan where I was able to get a few of these things, a synthesizer and a sampler and a computer, and started recording demos of just musical ideas that I had. And one of these demos made its way to Walt Disney Software, where a friend of mine worked as a tester. And it was really, that's how I got my first job, writing music professionally.
Was that before or after Flies on Fire?
This is actually after Flies on Fire.
Okay.
I kind of skipped over my whole... Yeah, I skipped over a lot of years.
I'm asking this because I don't think many people know this, but you actually had got a record deal with that band, right?
Yes. I was in a band. We were signed to Atco Atlantic Records. And we did 2 albums, a couple of music videos, a lot of touring, played some really big concerts. I got to live that lifestyle. And I'm not sure I got onto the film game music thing, which I thought your listeners might be interested in, but people might be interested in this too. This is really part of my background that kind of summates who I am and how I do stuff, is, playing in a live band and recording. And that's really where I learned how to work in the studio. I had my own MIDI studio, but it really wasn't a studio, so that's where I worked in my first professional studios, playing in bands. And I would ask engineers what they were doing. I was curious about how things worked and what a patch bay was. That's really how it all started for me. And I think that playing in a band gave me because I was always kind of a shy kid, but playing in bands really helped me come out of my shell a little bit. And, so that all ended, when I was around 27 years old, and our record company, our second album didn't do so well, so our record company dropped us. And it was around that time that I made this demo that went to Walt Disney Software and got my first job. And it was shortly after that I got a call from the VP up at SEGA, who pretty much hired me over the phone.
Okay.
Which was such a lucky break. His name is Roger Hector, and to this day I'm grateful to him. He's a great guy. Now, he actually used to be the VP of Walt Disney Software. And one of the guys at Walt Disney Software was going up to work at Sega and took some of my demos up with him. And it just so happened they were looking for a music director up there. And I asked him if he would give my demos to the powers that be. And he did. And Roger gave me a call and hired me. And that's really where my whole time at Sega started.
Mm-hmm. So from a demo that someone that you gave to a
Yes.
friend, and then it all snowballed from there.
Yes, on cassette tape, no less.
Okay.
Cassette tapes were still quite common then. So I that's how I recorded my stuff.
Mhm.
And, they were widely used. People still have them in their cars. So all you children out there, that's cassette tape has the two reels on each side. No, I'm joking.
Different from CDs. And people are now saying, CDs? What's that? Yeah. We're old.
Right. Yeah.
Never mind that. We're old.
Yeah. No, we used to record, but even in the studio and even a recording orchestra, we used to record to tape.
Yeah.
So if you screwed up, there was, and depending on the machine you recorded on, it was very hard to fix. It was hard to punch in. It was hard to punch out. So a lot of the time I'd worked on with some machines where you just had to play it all through, or some machines you could punch in if you had a good engineer, but you couldn't punch out. So if you were good in like the first verse and the first chorus, but made a mistake, but played the rest of the song perfectly, you had to like punch in where the mistake happened and play the rest out. So it was just different. It was different.
Yeah. People don't appreciate the how. It's not that they don't appreciate, but they don't know the difference between having things so easily and readily available today as with before people had to do things manually, and it was really a lot of work. So it's different. Yeah.
It was, and in a lot of ways, well, not in a lot of ways, it was definitely so much more expensive to do in those days. To have these big 24-track tape machines, these things were incredibly expensive. Had the wherewithal to make a recording, and just recording time was so expensive. Listen, I've lived in both worlds, and I wouldn't trade the world we're in for nothing. I think this technology is incredible. It is so incredible.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love it, and there's a lot of people that don't feel the same way. Whatever. I think that recording back in the days of tape was harder. It definitely was. And I think as a result, you had much fewer people doing it and being able to do it well, because it did require a certain level of musicianship that, you couldn't get away with anything then,
Mm-hmm.
You couldn't, there wasn't like, okay, I got this right once, let's cut it and paste it and fix it.
Yeah.
Auto-tune it or whatever. There just was none of that. But I just think what we're able to do now with the technology is astounding. I absolutely love it. I wouldn't trade it at all. And especially now that I'm kind of, thinking about recording the way we did back then. Oh my gosh. It's so easy now. So, it's great.
So you embrace the advancements of technology.
I absolutely embrace it, and I've been making music professionally during this whole rise since the early days of MIDI. The first game I did that I referenced for Disney was a game with a sound. It was a PC game, and I had to work with a sound card called the Ad-Lib Sound Blaster, or Sound Blaster Ad-Lib card. So that was a card that was inside the PC, and it had FM sounds in it, and you had to program music for that card. And when things eventually became streaming, I was just and sounds and samplers got better. I've just loved it, and it continues to get better. It's just amazing what you can do now.
And even for the current situation we're on, if you had to do things like you did before, you couldn't be working on new stuff right now, for example, from the comfort of your home or your home studio or whatever, right? So it would
Well, you
be
could.
very
Well, you
difficult,
could.
at least.
Yeah, absolutely. You could. But, in those days, you wrote at the piano. You have
Hmm.
pencil and paper, and you're at the piano, and you can write till your heart's content. And I still like to do some of that. That's where I kind of conceive of a lot of ideas. Aren't in my studio. I go inside the house, and I have a piano, and I sit there, and I still like to come up with initial ideas that way. But I've done whole film scores by myself in my studio, full orchestral scores.
Hmm.
I mean, I would love to have budget for real orchestra, but so much of these projects just don't set aside budget for that. I think it's incredible to be able to do that, to be able to realize complete orchestral ideas yourself. And that's, we've been able to do that now for a number of years. I think that's amazing.
Yeah.
Especially for people that don't have the wherewithal or, the credit to be able to, get an orchestra to play their stuff. You can really simulate something that sounds quite real to most people. I mean, obviously,
not to audiophiles.
Not to audiophiles. Obviously, it's not real. And, the fact of the matter is, it's not even close to the body of sound that you get from real players. But, you can really simulate it and make something that sounds, to my ears, quite fantastic. With what you have. To be able to do that by yourself is astounding to me still.
Yeah. Definitely. So, by the way, side note, we're talking about music in video games, in film. How important from your perspective, of course, you're the musician, so it's really important to you, but from a player point of view or a moviegoer, a spectator, how important do you think music is to these kinds of projects, to these forms of entertainment?
Well, I mean, we're all biased as composers, I feel it's hugely important. I forget the ratio. People would say the visuals are a certain percentage, dialogue is a certain percentage, and music is also a large part of that percentage. Maybe 20%, 25%. I forget the cut. There used to be a standard ratio that people would say that I used to hear. It's not always treated that way. It's certainly not treated that way in regards to budget. But, we come at the end. So people have usually spent a lot of their money and gone over budget, and things always cost more. So they're usually lower on money. But, I also think it depends on the project. And it's different with games versus film, in my estimation. I think that, I think that music can add a lot to games. But it's a little more complicated in that these days it's interactive. And I believe how that music fits together and reacts to what the player is doing within the game.
Yeah.
How cleverly that's done. That's a whole nother, that's a whole nother dynamic than in film. In film, we as composers look at a film and react and try and enhance what's already there. We're not, game music to me is a little bit more like a puzzle. You're asked to create a certain vibe over a level or an area of the game. And you create all of these parts that can work together as a sum of the whole, but yet still be entertaining in all their separate parts. It's very difficult.
And you kind of have to anticipate what the player will do as well, right? So the music can adapt to whatever is happening on screen. Whereas
Absolutely.
with film, people are just watching; they're not interacting with the movie, right?
Right. It's a whole nother dynamic, and I'm not saying that it's easier. Film
Mm-hmm.
music is certainly. Uh, I think film music is much more uh, uh, sensitive to what you do as a composer than game music. And the reason I say that is because film music is finite. It's game music. You may have one track for an area of the game that consists of 12 different parts that together all work together, but yet there's different kind of moods or elements that come in based on what the player is doing or what the player encounters. Whereas film music is finite. What's there is there.
Yeah.
And it's enhancing what's on screen. So, it's really tricky in that if you go too far one way or the other, you can overdo it or underdo it. And it's a very, very difficult balance to find in film, how to do these things. And I always I consider myself a lifelong student. I'm still trying to learn how to do it right. And I'm not sure if I'm 100% happy with anything that I've done, because it's there's just so many different ways that you can handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
So
yeah, always learning, right? Always improving. That's the goal.
yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Try and learn something new every day, even if it's not in music. Learning other things will help you musically. Learning
sure.
about history or the economy or just about anything, because you may work on a film that deals with these subjects one day, and you'll want to be able to relate.
Okay, yeah, that's a good tip. So
yeah.
We've mentioned you working for SEGA, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. But when you did that demo, when you recorded that demo, your main goal was not to compose music, to write music for video games, right? So you wanted to write music for film.
Well, I'll be honest with you. If I think back of the music that was on that demo, it was really all orchestral. So it really didn't pertain to video games. And it was much more something that was akin to, say, concert music or film music, or even theme park music. But it was a demo of my music. That's how I thought of it back then. I was young. I didn't know. I thought, well, I would have a musical idea. I would work on it. I would record it. Sounded good to me. And that was what consisted of my demos in those days. Now, remember, back then, we're still, talking about a time where people considered game music to be blips and bleeps. That's what I would always hear.
Exactly.
And so these demos were recorded with, kind of early orchestral libraries. Things like, I remember there was a little box called the Proteus, which I had. And it had these, there was an orchestral version of this box, and I had it. And listen, for back then, I thought it was great. There was an oboe sound and a clarinet sound and a trumpet sound. Looking back on it now, it sounds terrible. But back then, you could, simulate an electronic sounding orchestra, enough to be convincing that there was no one that was convinced that it was a real orchestra, but they could kind of get the sense of what you were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. And so were you, did you have the same feeling about video game music as other people, that it was just bleeps and bloops? So when you actually were invited to work for or at SEGA Technical Institute, did you think, well, there goes my music career. Now I have to write bleeps and bloops? Or did
You know,
you
it's
approach it
interesting.
differently?
Well, I ended up approaching it differently, but it's something I never thought I would do. I never planned to go into game music. The opportunity presented itself because I was trying to make money, and I had had a few jobs while I was playing in bands, and that was all. You know, when we got dropped from our label, I had to get a job doing a few different things. I actually worked as a game tester, and that was
Mm-hmm.
my first introduction to game companies. And you know, from what I had heard, I I remember thinking, you know, this has potential. That, yeah, a lot of the music was blippy and bleepy, and it sounded that way. But I thought, well, I'm wondering if there's a way we could do more with this technology. And that was my approach at Sega. I thought I had even heard some other stuff that was going on at the time up at Sega, and you know, I thought to me, it sounded a little goofy. It did sound a little blippy and bleepy and kind of just super, super happy and goofy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of not who I was musically. So that's the direction I tried to take.
Okay. Were you on the receiving end of some sort of prejudice from others, maybe fellow musicians or friends, when you told them that you were working for a video game company? Because of that stereotype that it was just bleepy and stuff.
Right. No, not of friends. I think my bandmates, because that was really it. We were kind of still practicing the band that I was in, Flies on Fire, but it was, you know, we were still actually practicing and playing some gigs and things like that. But when I got offered the job, and the job entailed me moving up north to San Francisco area from LA, that was the end of it for me, you know, and they were very happy for me. I mean, I could not believe it. I was offered a salary plus benefits and a free studio to write music all day. I couldn't believe it. It was too good to be true. So yeah, everybody personally who knew me was very happy for me, but it was not something in those days, because I still had aspirations to work on film, that it wasn't something that I put out there. Because I actually did a little additional music on films during that time. I worked on a few things, and it was not something I told anybody about.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Because in those days, it was kind of, that's something you didn't want people in Hollywood to think about you as a composer. Oh, he's a video game composer, because that was the term that they all used, was blips and bleeps, and
yeah, sure,
you're not really serious. So, yeah, I certainly didn't make it known.
Okay, makes sense. Okay,
Yeah.
You mentioned dealing with the limitations of the hardware. Obviously, you composed for the Genesis at the time.
Yes.
A little bit for the Master System, if I'm not mistaken. Sonic Spinball, or
yeah, Sonic Spinball was the first game I did that I worked on. There were a number of composers that worked on that game. So Sonic Spinball was the first game that I worked on there, and actually the first day that I started.
Oh,
first day.
Welcome. Here's a project to work on.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the first day that I started, that they were in the throes of like the final days of finishing that game, but they were short on music. Some guys over at another division of Sega, there were 3 or 4 guys that had contributed some tracks, but they were still missing some tracks for that game. So I kind of jumped in and the first day and did a track, and I think the next few days after that, I did a few other tracks, and then they released the game. It was like, wow, that was fast. I didn't get really a chance to even get my bearings.
Yeah.
But it was cool.
How did you deal with the limitations of the hardware? Did you... some people say, I actually say that because I like listening to video game music from back in the day. And most of our listeners also like to listen to those old tracks.
Yes.
There were limitations, right? But I think composers, as I say, limitations spark creativity. So
Absolutely.
you guys had to be very creative to make some things work on the hardware that you had to work on.
Right? Do you know what? I learned so much working within those limitations and having them. And it was such a good thing for me, growth-wise, as a composer, because when you have so little to work with, it forces you to really focus on what you're doing, what each voice is doing, how important it becomes. That wasn't my approach before, because my approach was, I can add any instrument I want, put a bunch of bullshit in and flourishes and stuff like this. Can't do that in this environment. Every note has to count. So it did so much for me in terms of growing as a musician and a writer. And it's something that, to this day, I'll force myself into a box a little bit, whether consciously or because of budget. I've done a couple of things for Spike Lee, and he's called me and he said, listen, I only want a clarinet and a piano. And that's it. And on one cue, he said he just wanted the clarinet. It was a really deep scene, and he said, I only want the clarinet on this scene. So those kinds of things force you to write in ways that you never would have written before. And I think it's something that every composer should do. When you're forced into a situation, and my time at SEGA, I really grew. By the time, the last game that I did there for the Genesis was a game called The Ooze. And by that point, I loved the Genesis. Absolutely loved it. I'd worked with it for a while. I'd learned how to deal with its constraints. I felt like I really pushed it to the limit on some things. And I loved it. I just absolutely loved it. I wish I had the whole setup even to this day, sitting in my studio, just because it forced me to write things in such a way that I just never would have done before. And it was really rewarding. And, I mean, that's all I can say about it. You know, when I first got there, you know, mind you, I'd already worked with the Sound Blaster, which was, you know, in some ways more limiting than the Genesis. And, so I was already on that road, but, yeah, you know, in some ways I miss those times, you know. I think that it really drew a lot out of composers during those times for the very same reasons.
Definitely. Tired of listening to the same music on the radio over and over again? Wouldn't it be great if you could have a station that played your favorite Sega music and remixes 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? Luckily, there's Radio Sega, an online radio station dedicated to the best in Sega and Atlas music. And you can request your favorites at any time. Plus, Radio Sega has live shows every single day of the week, including a first-hand preview of the SEGA Lounge. You can find the full schedule of shows and listen to the station by going to radiosega.net. Radio Sega, playing the best Sega music 24/7. Okay. Can you guide us, in simple terms, through the process of creating music for the Genesis? So you had to work with a programmer that actually implemented what you wanted to do, right? So you composed, you wrote the music, and someone else had to help you with that as well, or?
You mean put it in the Genesis?
Yes.
No. The only time that occurred was when I worked with the SEGA team, which was the Japanese team that did, that was Naka's team, Naka and Yasuhara.
Sonic Team, then.
Yeah,
perhaps,
exactly. Sonic Team, yes. So they used a different front end tool and software to implement their music into the game. It was segregated in those days, and looking back on it, it's so weird. But we had the American side and we had the Japanese side, and that's what we called it as Americans. It's like, oh yeah, he's on the American side. So, which is weird when you think about it. There weren't a lot of people there weren't a lot of Americans that I saw that worked with the Japanese side. Naka had his team, and he was, they worked a certain way. There was a language barrier, so it made some of that difficult. I'm rambling too much, aren't I?
No, it's cool. Yeah. It actually makes sense, because I think even to this day, there's a little bit of a separation between different branches of Sega of Japan, Sega of America, Sega of Europe. Things are a little bit better, I feel.
Right.
Or have been getting a little bit better in the past few years. But a lot of some controversial decisions that Sega made in the past were in part due to that separation between different countries and different. They treat each other as different companies. Okay, so we're talking about how the process of actually getting the music that you wrote on the Genesis worked, right?
Yes.
And there was some differences between games so Sonic Team of Japan games and the other games, right?
Yes. They used a different platform with which to develop music. So, in the case when I worked with the Sonic team, which was primarily on Sonic and Knuckles, where my stuff was implemented, where I worked with the gentleman who from Sega of Japan, who was over in America, and he was implementing the music. His name was Setsu, I think, Setsumaru.
Yeah. Masaru Setsumaru, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fabulous guy. And so I developed these tracks. I would record the audio, and I would do it full band with ideas that I had. And I would give him the MIDI, and he would realize that within the system that they used for their games. Now, on the American side, I did that whole process myself. I developed the music for the Genesis with the front end that we used, which was called GEMS, GEMS. It stood for something: Game Emulator Music System. Oh, I think that's it.
Okay.
And I can't believe I remembered that, but well, it's something like that. But anyway, so I developed everything myself, where I would go in and edit instruments to make instruments to use within the music, and then I would output what's called a bin file, which had all the music and sound effects in it, and I would give it to the main programmer of the game, and he would implement that within the game. And I would always have to go over with the programmer where this went within the game, so on and so forth. So things would be implemented in the right spot.
Okay, interesting. By the way, James, Genesis editor for music and sound effects.
Oh, okay. All right.
I just Googled it.
You did.
Google
okay, so I was wrong. But, to be honest with you,
close enough.
But you know what? The way that I used it, I think my description of it is more, at least the way that I
accurate, right?
Accurate, yes. Because basically what it did is, my main composing software that I use is called Digital Performer. So I was still using that on a Macintosh, but via MIDI, there was well, let me back up. GEMS was a software that ran in DOS on a PC, and via a printer cable would connect into this contraption that we would stick in an actual Genesis machine. And I could basically turn the Genesis into an external synth, like we think of nowadays. And so it basically was an emulation. Or, no, it wasn't an emulation, because it actually was the Genesis. maybe their description is better. And then there's the sound effect part.
It was the software that you used to make music.
It was, and the sound effects, because remember then I had to do the sound effects too, which was a whole, which it wasn't really my forte, but that's just what you did then, if you were, at least where I was, because there was only one person in my department, and it was me. I had a director level status. But I had no staff under me. It was just I was by myself. And over in Sega of America, which was a different division of Sega than STI, they had several composers over there. They had they had a studio, they had a whole team of composers and everything, and they worked on what they worked on. But in STI, there was just me alone. So I had to do everything by myself. But I didn't care, I was just happy to have a full-time job writing music. I couldn't believe it.
That's great. So how did you deal with sound effects? How did you, and not just sound effects, but the actual score for the game? Because nowadays with, cutscenes, CGI and whatnot, composers usually get sent some rough sketches or or even the cutscenes to get a feel of the game and what happens and etc. Did you get that much information back in the day? Especially I think you already said that in some cases you had weeks to work on specific projects. So did you get any kind of information that helped you come up with the soundtrack for that game and the sound effects?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. In the case of the Sonic stuff, no, there wasn't really any information because Sonic was a thing. It already had an established thing, a vibe to it, musically and so forth. But in the original games that I worked on the with the American teams, and then later on with I'll talk about, there's another team that was headed up by a guy named Makoto Uchida. Uchida-san had his own team, and we later developed games for him later on, or I worked on music for those games. But I would start with some kind of write-up. They would give me a profile, what the game is, what the vibe of it is. And, I would see art. And this was really easy because we all worked in the same office building. So I would just walk to someone's cubicle and kind of look at what they were doing. I'd look at the artists. I'd look at what the animators were doing. So I'd get a vibe of it very early on. But, I really didn't start developing music until they had some kind of gameplay going on that I could actually see and we could implement into the game. Because to me, there just wasn't really any point. It's writing music for a film before there's a film, which certainly you can do and is done all the time. And I think it can be a great way to work. But with games, where my mindset at that time is I really wanted to create something that would enhance the vibe, the pace of that game. And all these different games had different paces, and some I felt needed some action to help push them a little bit because maybe their gameplay seemed a little slow to me. So, I would generally wait. I would kind of come up with ideas, but I would really wait till I implemented anything in the Genesis until there was at least, somewhat of a first level going that we could put into the game and have a feel for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of a Comic Zone, which is,
yes,
for many, I think myself included, I think the best, the soundtrack that you're better known for, at least.
Right.
I'm not sure if it's the best, but I really enjoy that, and I really think it fits into the game very well. So how, and I think that's probably, from what I've heard from you so far, maybe what actually we get the feel of how where you were musically at the time and what you liked. So it's a bit more rock, right? So
Right.
maybe we got the feel of your rock star years in the band,
Right.
right? So
Right.
was that the feel that you
Exactly.
were going for with that game specifically? Because
Absolutely.
it's a very different game from anything else that was done at the time.
Right. And that that started, the game designer on that game was I'm talking about him like he's dead. He's not. Peter Morowick. If he hears this, he'll laugh.
Yeah.
And when Peter first had the idea for that game, I was involved in that game very, very early on, before there was any gameplay. And Peter created. He was I'm talking about him like he's dead. Not that he was. He is a super talented guy, a jack of all trades. So he was a game designer, but the way that he would propose a game is he would kind of do all the art himself and animate sequences of, basically what they would look like. And he showed this to me, and we went out for lunch one day, and he told me the whole Seattle grunge scene was really big at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he sketched Turner, who's the main character in this game. He kind of patterned after one of these guys, or attempted to,
Okay.
I'm not sure if, he wasn't wearing flannel, or did he have a flannel shirt tied around his waist? Maybe he did.
I don't think so. He had a
it's really not important.
A white T-shirt.
Right.
Can't
Right.
remember.
So obviously grunge came to mind. But how do you do that on the Sega Genesis? That's tricky. So, I created this demo. Was the first thing that I wrote for it, and actually Peter helped use it to sell the executives on the game. And I think it's the music that you hear when he's fighting in the shipyards. And I think, I don't know, I had heard some grunge song, maybe Alice in Chains or something like that. And then I came back and I did this piece, and I edited some instruments that kind of sounded fuzzy. And I'm a guitar player, so I was able to write a lot of this stuff on guitar, and then my plan was to translate this into the Genesis and have it kind of come off. So that was really difficult. But getting back to what I spoke about earlier, my experience in bands and knowing what everybody does in a band and having played for so long in bands, that I think it really helped me develop the music for that game. Because my idea was to have, from the very opening screen, make it sound like there's a live band playing the soundtrack of the game, which is why I had the idea that over the opening to have this band kind of tuning up.
Yeah.
I thought, so I used pitch bend, which you could do with the Genesis in limited amounts without crashing it. I made it sound like a guitar is tuning, much like I would tune, and a bass noodling, and drummers always hitting their drums, because that's what drummers do. Just everybody's kind of loosening up before we start. Because at that time, I think every single Sega game always started with this same little Sega, this little sign. So, and I thought, why don't we, first of all, I asked, can we do something? I don't know if this is like going to piss people off, because this company always has this kind of signature thing. So I was told I could try it, and I did it. And I had the vocalist warm up, with these little 8-bit samples, which was me, basically.
Yeah, it was you, right?
Yeah, doing basically.
By the way, for people who are not familiar with it, let me just play the clip.
Oh, sure.
Test 1, 2. Sega.
I actually remember hearing this for the first time, and I cracked up laughing with.
Oh, you did? Oh, great.
The Sega.
Right. Well, in those days, because that's me imitating Elvis.
Yeah.
Really, that's what I was thinking, because I say test 1, 2, which is what we always did when you play a live show. Test 1, 2, or some form of that. And a singer will always, so the mix guy can get a level. And I thought how cool it would be to just have like an Elvis impersonator do it. But I'm not sure how many people really got the joke, but I was really into subversive humor at that time. And I would seek any possible way that I could to get these little sounds or little things into games that I thought were funny. I didn't really care if anybody else thought they're funny. I thought that they were funny. And one of them actually that's in that game is every now and then Peter had it implemented in such a way that a certain sequence of actions would have to happen. Sketch Turner will fart.
Yeah.
So, and I got a kick out of that because, listen, I was a single guy. I was working 7 days, working all the time. It was raining all the time up there. I had to do something to make myself laugh. So those kinds of things made me laugh. And I know it sounds kind of dumb, but I think it's funny.
Yeah.
But what was really funny were the, when the game went through testing, testers, they test the game and they send in test reports, to have bugs fixed and things like that. And we kept continually getting these reports about quote unquote flatulation sound from Sketch. And that this is a problem and we need to fix this bug. And they thought it was a sound bug. And we would just laugh our asses off. And we never fixed it. We would just, wink, wink, nod, nod. Oh, yeah, we're working on that. And it just made its way all the way through. And listen, to this day, even with my sons, if I hear a fart sound, I laugh. So...
Yeah,
I'm hoping
I think it's
kindred spirits
universal,
will find it.
Universal comedy, I think.
Well, not with my wife. Not with my wife.
Really?
It's not universal to her.
Okay.
The jury's out on my daughter. She's only 3, so we'll see. We'll see.
I think if all else fails, little farting noise or a
Right,
farting joke
exactly.
or something, little toilet humor.
Yeah,
does
exactly.
a trick, I think. Yeah.
So I don't know where I was as far as the game, but that I started on that game. I've never started on a game so early.
Mm-hmm.
And I started on that one, and I don't think I've ever worked on a game so long as that one. I was involved in that game for a very, very long time, and I had breaks when I went over and jumped and worked on other things, and then I'd come back to Comic Zone. But it was really my mission with that game to try and push the Genesis as far as I could. Mm-hmm. And I think with the help of the main programmer of that game, a guy named Adrian Stevens, who is just a brilliant programmer. And he actually wrote some new routines, coding-wise, to help me get more audio into the game. Because, I talked to him, I said, listen, I really want to, with regards to the intro we talked about, where I do my Elvis imitation and check 1, 2, even just that little snippet right there eats up a huge portion of what you can use for the game. So, because it was so limited, the memory was so limited. So he created this routine that would, save us a lot of memory in that way and in real time unzip these samples each time that they were used. And so he really was able to make that happen so I could have a larger audio footprint. And what was normally, you just don't see, you didn't see that back then, that much audio going into a game.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
But, there was a learning curve for me coming in and making sound effects at the 8-bit level. And, the one audio channel that we had to be shared by everything from the snare drum. If you used audio for a snare drum, which I did in that game, and any kind of audio sound effects.
Awesome.
And the audio sound effects,
limitations, sparking creativity.
Right, sparking creativity and getting some unlikely people involved. Peter is one. He does the robot guy that you fight, and I kind of put effects on his voice, and I did a lot of the sound effects myself, vocal sound effects. But some of them were recorded by a few of the admins or secretaries. I would just grab somebody and say, "Hey, would you like to come into my studio?" And that actually sounds kind of like hitting them. Hey.
Hey,
No, it wasn't
Sega.
like that. Sega. Right. Hey. Come inside I would invite them to come inside my studio and let's try and record some sound effects. So I kind of made it like a office-wide fun thing. And, so people, I don't know if people were really hiring voice actors then to do stuff like that. Maybe they were. Like Sega of America across the way, they would always do stuff like they would, it seemed like, oh gosh, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but it seemed like they would spend as much money as possible trying to do their game stuff over there. But I was the path of least resistance. I didn't I didn't know if I had a budget. I didn't really care. I was like, I need a female voice. Oh, there's a girl working over here. Let me see if she, would like to do a yell sound or something. Because we had a couple of female characters, I think, in the game. And that's how I did it. It was fine.
Awesome. And it worked amazing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Great job.
Yes. I'm very proud of that game to this day. I only wish it would have come out earlier in the Genesis cycle. Because by the time it came out, everybody was already looking ahead. And I think that game really lost a foothold that it could have had at the time. But, I think popularity of the game is largely because of, the game being reported to other devices and then people looking back after the fact because there's been a whole movement, musically, especially from looking back to music of that time. And I've even commented, listening to a lot of modern pop music, commented to my wife, hey, this sounds like stuff we were doing in the Genesis days. Even the sound of it, of a lot of pop music that I hear. And I guess it stands to reason because a lot of the people making that music or producing it were probably, maybe a kid then or a teenager and were playing these games and may have been influenced by it.
Oh,
so
for sure.
I don't know if that has something to do with it. But,
definitely. For many, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, because we have all of this bandwidth and everything, and so much of what's going on right now, and it's even in film music, is how can we degrade the sound and distort it and make it sound lo-fi?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking to myself, we were spending decades trying not to do that. Trying to make all this lo-fi crap that we had to work with sound high fidelity. And it's funny because now I get to go back and screw stuff up again, which I love.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah,
kind of everything comes back.
Yeah. Oh, that's for sure. Yeah. What's old is new again right now.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. Speaking of the music in Comic Zone, by the way, so you actually ended up creating a vocal arrange album.
Yes.
With lyrics, vocals.
Yes.
And you had a band called Roadkill, right? So
yes, that was a band
that
I put together. Yeah.
Specifically for this project, or did it go on for some time doing other things?
No, it never went on. I was told when I was I was still up north at the time for Sega, and there was a marketing idea to include, because of this whole rock grunge thing around the game, the sound of it and the look of it or whatever, the vibe of it. I was told, maybe I even went to a marketing meeting or something where they wanted to add a CD of music to the game. And that's kind of how it all sprung about. Now, my boss let me have a budget to go make, really, it wasn't a full album. It was an EP. So I came down to Los Angeles and just got some of my buddies. One of them was in a band called Mary's Danish, and another one was in my former band, Flies on Fire. But they now had they turned into a punk band called Vitamade. and then another friend of mine who was in some other band, which I can't remember. And there were guys I picked because I felt that their sound and playing style would work well for this. So we rehearsed once and just went in the studio and did it. And it was really great. It was really great, for me, having been up at SEGA for a couple of years, to get in the studio with a band again was really great. And
you wrote everything. You wrote the music, the lyrics, right?
I did. I did. I wrote all the music, and but Tim, who was my former bandmate from Flies on Fire, he ended up helping me out with the lyrics, because I'm not a big lyric guy, and Tim's, he was really into lyrics, and he's a really good lyricist. And some of the lyrics I came up with, I just didn't put much time into, and they were really dumb. So, because Tim's whole vibe was, hey, listen, I'm just going to sing. You need to write the lyrics. I'll do it, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what they were expecting, before, like when I contacted them to do this. I think that they were expecting, oh, this is game music, but I think once I got down there and they realized, oh, this is pretty cool. Then Tim said, you know what, I'm going to work on, some of these lyrics are just, I don't want to sing this, basically. Now, he did keep some of my lyrics, but he would kind of go in and change them a little bit, or kind of make them more to his, liking.
Mm-hmm.
And, and he sang most of the tracks except for one, which I sang. But, because I didn't want to sing. But I somehow got pushed into it, because I had to, for the demos that we did. So we went in, we rehearsed the songs, we went into Sound City, and we recorded basic tracks. But when we did these basic tracks, they wanted me, because I'd written all the melodies for the vocal. Tim wanted me to sing rough, so he could then take those home and learn what to sing over the tracks. Mm-hmm. So that's how that all started, and that's how it started with him saying, I think one of the lines I had was, cut myself on a piece of pipe. My wife jokes around about that to this day. It was for the sewer keeper guy. It was, let me put it this way. I was so busy getting ready for that session, and the lyrics for me were such an afterthought, that when I met with Tim the day before we rehearsed, I was actually literally writing the lyrics, or some of them, while I was driving on the way to his house. And I drove a stick shift, so it was difficult to write the lyrics. I could only write stuff down at a red light, and then I'd have to go. I'm not kidding. That's exactly how some of those lyrics were written. It was when I was going over to his house to meet with him and go over the lyrics.
It's the 1995 version of texting and driving.
Exactly. It was very dangerous. But I was young and, reckless back then.
Reckless.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's an amazing story.
Yeah. So we did that, and I think it got released, because I know in America somebody in marketing had a little bit of a different idea, that they wanted to put a compilation together of some well-known bands that had nothing to do with the game, and put that in as a free CD, which I didn't think was a really good idea, but that's what they did with the American edition. To me, that offered nothing. The tracks were just like for some bands. I think one of them was Tool. I can't remember a lot of the bands that were on this track, but they were all well-known bands at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of the typical marketer, well, let's do this, and compilation, but it had nothing to do with the game. There were no songs on that extra bonus CD that related to the game whatsoever. So to me, I just didn't see the point in doing that. I just think they thought, well, maybe it'll drive more people to notice the game and buy it. I don't know if it did or not. Who knows? But in the, I think in the European version or the PC version of the game, they included the CD that I did, which makes it kind of rare.
I wasn't aware of that other bonus CD. I was just familiar with the Roadkill version.
Right. Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that other bonus CD does exist. It's out
Mm.
there. But again, it's just a compilation of tracks from
Mhm.
some other big band's albums where it's like, well, okay.
Yeah,
I don't
yes,
really get this, but
They
like
did
some
a few
weird.
of those with Sonic as well. Music that had nothing to do with Sonic, but like,
Right. And,
with-
in my opinion, for real gamers, because I had been involved with some Sonic stuff by that time and really had been, becoming more in tune with that world. And I thought to myself that real gamers are just going to be like, huh? I mean, maybe they'll like having this extra CD of cool songs. Okay, that's cool. But I think they would have been much more interested. And I didn't know about this until after I'd already done the Roadkill CD. So, it was just, it is what it was. It was
was
like,
a
okay,
thing,
well,
yeah.
that's what they want to do. That's why I first learned
Good
the
for
word
them.
cross marketing or cross promotional, like whatever the term is, the marketing term.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. Awesome. By the way, Roadkill because of the rat in the game.
The
or-
rat, yeah.
Yeah?
The rat,
Okay.
yeah. And I thought it was a cool name when I was thinking of a name for the band because we all, this was just a band that I put together for this, like I said,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
it wasn't, we had no plans to do anything else, which we never did. They were just buddies of mine, from my band days. And so it was just a fictitious band. And so I thought, well, that's a good name, is after the rat. Because the rat was one of my favorite characters in the game. I love the rat.
Yeah. you could use the rat as an item, which was great.
Right. He would unlock stuff for you, right?
Yeah.
Yes. It was a hard game, though. Man.
Hard but amazing, yeah. But really hard, yeah. That's
Really
that's true.
hard. Really hard. And, I remember hearing people say it was hard, and I tried to play it, and I was just like, damn, man. Because I would try and get in areas of the game so I could listen to stuff. And I'd have to get Peter. I'd say, Peter, can you, or I would go to Adrian's office, who was the programmer, and I would say, can I just play me level 3? Because I can't, I get frustrated. I'd storm down to his office. Can you just bring the damn level up? I can't get there,
Yeah, it was hard, but it was very, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
Howard, I want to try something with you called quick shots. Apologies. No, not shots as in alcohol, unfortunately. What this is basically a quick fire round. So I have some words or phrases here. And what I wanted you to do is to tell me the first thing that pops into your head. Okay. Ready?
I am ready.
Okay. Quick shots with Howard Drossin. First one. Music.
Beethoven.
Okay.
I don't know. It was the first thing that popped in my head.
Sure, yeah.
Stravinsky? Yeah.
No, that's a good answer.
Yeah.
Okay. Video games.
Sega.
Good, because the next one is Sega.
Oh. Sonic.
Movies.
Daniel Day-Lewis. I don't know why. He's my favorite actor.
Okay. Excellent choice. And the last one. Howard Drossin.
Oh boy. Is this psychotherapy analysis? Because my id, or whatever they call it, may be on full display. Okay, I'm going to give this a little thought. So this is not going to be so quick shot.
Okay.
In development. To be determined. That's better.
and to be announced later.
No, I have a better one. Complicated.
Okay, it's complicated. That's a great one.
Complicated. Yes, actually, that's the best. That's the one we'll keep.
For sure.
That's my official answer.
Okay. So that was Quick Shots with Howard Drossin. That's it for the first part of my interview with the legendary Howard Drossin. As I said at the beginning of the show, there's more to our conversation, so be sure to come back next week for some info on Virtual Sonic, Howard's advice to beginner musicians, and the SEGA Lounge Challenge. Yes, I didn't forget, I just saved it for next week. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the show. If you did, let me give you your weekly reminder to subscribe to the SEGA Lounge on your favorite podcast app. We also have a brand new website you can find at thesegalounge.com, where you can find links to the show on all major podcast services. Also, please consider leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser. And be sure to share the show with your friends on social media. Your support is greatly appreciated. Finally, a quick word about the times we are living in. The world's been facing a lot of different and difficult challenges lately. Whatever we do, whatever our preferences are, whatever video games or music or any other things we like, we owe it to ourselves and each other to try and become a better person each day. The way we can do that is, above all else, to treat each other with respect and compassion. After all, we're all in this, and by this I mean the world, together. Not just with words, but especially through our actions. Let's do our best to help one another and just be kind to everyone. With that thought, I hope you have a great week. Thank you so much for listening, and please come back for more Howard Drossin goodness next week, right here on the SEGA Lounge. Bye-bye! The SEGA Lounge, hosted by me, KC, and part of Radio Sega's network of live shows and podcasts. Theme song and incidental music by OSC. Find them at opussciencecollective.bandcamp.com. Got any suggestions? Drop me an email to kc@radiosega.net. Follow us on Twitter at the SEGA Lounge. You can find previous episodes of the show by going to thesegalounge.com and wherever fine podcasts are downloaded.